Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Welcome to Labor Vision, a production of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I'm your host, Erica Hammond, and joined with me today are the President of the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, Frank Flynn, and the President of the National Education Association, Rhode Island, Larry Purtill. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Why don't we start with you, Frank? Can you tell us a little bit about your union and the members you represent?
Sure. The Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals is an affiliation of the American Federation of Teachers. We have 24 locals throughout Rhode Island and one very active retiree group. Our locals represent primarily K-12 teachers and school support staff. We also represent higher education. We have the Rhode Island College faculty, the professional staff, and the adjunct union there. We represent the faculty at Bryant University. We have some public sector employees at Rhode Island Department of Ed, and in the court system, the court stenographers are represented by us. In addition, we have some private sector. We have the Rhode Island Student Assistance Counselors, as well as we represent the direct service providers from the Trudeau Center.
Okay.
And last but not least, we have 3 locals of visiting nurses that work in different places in Rhode Island.
Awesome. Thank you. And Larry, I know we just had Stephanie Mandeville on, but for our viewers who missed that segment, can you talk a little bit about NEARI and the members you represent?
Sure. We have about 12,000 members, and like Frank, K-12, teachers, support professionals. We also have higher ed, state employees, and some municipal employees. We have a retired group as well. And this is a big year for us. This is NEA Rhode Island's 175th year. So we're planning some events to highlight our history, but also to highlight what our members and our members do every day.
All right, awesome. And now, Frank, do you want to talk about some of the RIFTHP's core legislative issues that they'll be focusing on this year?
Sure. Well, most importantly, we'll be working very closely to analyze the governor's budget proposal and how it impacts the employees that we represent. Certainly, K-12 funding is very important to us, making sure that there's additional money to support the schools, and particularly the programs that they're trying to introduce. We have a shortage of multi-language learning teachers, making sure there's enough money to support that population, additional money for special education tuition, out-of-district tuition. In the budget, more money for the DD community, which we advocate for every year. Other things like not necessarily for our members, but making sure the minimum wage it gets raised so that the students that we represent, their families can afford housing and afford all the other things that are necessary in this day and age.
Right. And you mentioned the DD population support. Can you talk a little bit about the direct service provider legislation? I know that this work will continue, right, from last year?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
There was an increase last year of 91 cents. This is a very tight budget year. There's projected to be somewhere between $180 and $200 million shortfall, so they're going to have to look at alternative revenue sources, as well as making some cuts in other areas. So it's a primary focus of ours. We've been working with Senator DePalma for the last several years and Representative Shanley from Warwick to make sure that this population that work with our most vulnerable clients and citizens are able to hire people and retain people to do that important work. And it's very difficult work, and oftentimes the people aren't paid commensurate with the responsibilities they have.
Absolutely. And you said that some of those members that you represent are at the Trudeau Center?
The Trudeau Center are our employees, yes.
I used to volunteer at the Trudeau Center, so I have a lot of good friends still there. All right, Larry, and do you want to talk to us a little bit about NERI's focus on mental health in schools?
Sure, and it's a huge focus for us, and our primary focus going forward, along with, as Frank talked about, the budget. A couple years ago, in discussions with the governor, we were talking about school safety, and we set up some meetings around the state, 5 of them, with our members to talk about school safety, and every one of those meetings within 5 minutes turned to mental health issues. We need more mental health providers, we need more resources. The governor talked about in their State of the State the other night about providing that. It's important for a variety of reasons, obviously, but it also affects school climate, school discipline, and mental health cuts across all age groups, all income categories, but when you combine mental health with poverty, it gets even worse. So our focus is reaching out and making sure that the services are provided so the kids can be successful. That and pre-K, I think, are the two things we can do right now to really help public education and help students.
And what does that look like in schools? Is it adding more mental health individuals in the schools, or?
And that's one, because often when a student has an issue, there's no one available to deal with that issue immediately. So, and I think we need to be creative too and think outside the box and have counselors available on the weekends and for families, not just during the school day. And part of that is, again, people can't always afford those type of services. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure those are available for both students and families.
And what is the impact that would have on not only your members, but also the students in the school? So,
well, I think when you're suffering from trauma or you're suffering from some type of mental illness, it's very hard to concentrate in school, and who cares about history when you're suffering trauma at home. So those issues have to be addressed, and they not only affect that individual student, but they carry over into the classroom, can be discipline issues, so it affects everybody. So it's important that we address it.
And how are you, what are some ways that you guys are addressing it?
Well, more professional development, lobbying for more money for more professionals, trying to make people aware of the issues. I think a lot of people aren't aware of the severity of it in the schools today. And so making people aware so that they'll be supportive of more funds in helping out.
Yeah, and just to follow up, we have an opioid crisis in Rhode Island, throughout the nation. And that certainly impacts those students whose families are dealing with that, and it's virtually every family in the state, is in some way impacted by that. We represent substance abuse counselors that work in the schools. They're embedded in the schools. They provide a great service to the students. Unfortunately, it's not funded at the level it needs to be to get it into every school in the state. So we're hoping that in this governor's budget, with that money or some other federal monies, we'll be able to expand that program, because that's certainly a mental health issue that's really becoming a focus of government and the school system.
It's a crisis.
It is a crisis.
Frank talked about raising the minimum wage too. That's important, because if you're living in poverty and you're working 2 or 3 or 4 jobs to support your family, and these other issues arise, you may not be able to address them. So sometimes when we think about schools, what's going on, we think about what's going on in the school building and classes and curriculum, but all these other issues have a huge impact as well.
Can't separate the two, right? And I know in a lot of cases too, it's not just the parent or the guardian who is working those multiple jobs. It may be the child as well, or the student as will, right?
We have a lot of grandparents now raising children, which is really a critical situation.
And would either of you like to talk about a few other legislative pieces, like core legislative pieces that you guys will be focusing on this year?
Well, I think professional development, funding for professional development, back in the late 2008, 2009, we had a dedicated stream of money that went to the districts to provide professional development for teachers and school staff. It was over $4 million. That was called Article 31 at the time, and then it became Article 18. That money was eliminated when we had the recession in 2010. So we have great needs in professional development for teachers, and districts are on very tight budgets already, so they don't have the money. And it's going to be critical this year as they adopt new curriculums throughout the state for all of the school districts, and for things like mindfulness and culturally responsive pedagogy, wellness, mental health advocacy, all of those areas, and many, many more need professional development for teachers, and we got to make sure that we are able to provide it, and that we have the resources to do that, either internally or by bringing in the appropriate professionals.
And the best type of professional development is from the ground up instead of top down. It's what teachers need to be successful in their classroom. And as Frank just talked about, there are so many issues out there in professional development, meaningful, well thought out professional development, but also we need the resources and the funding to do it.
Now, do either of you have an idea of what this professional development will look like, or is that still in the works?
There's a lot of discussion about it because now it's going to be something that's mandated throughout the state to provide. There are a lot of different ways to look at it. I've believed for many years that when Larry and I were on the Certification Policy Advisory Board together for many years, he was smart enough to get off of it. I'm still on it. But that being said, I think there needs to be a statewide clearinghouse of professional development for teachers that, either run by the state or by Rhode Island Department of Ed, that, can provide these and organize these so that we don't have the duplication, and they vet what is good professional development, because you don't want to, we're all struggling with resources. We want to make sure that, we don't provide professional development that isn't of a high quality that we need, and that we don't have duplication in our spending our resources in this, doing the same thing in multiple places where it could be combined and be much more cost efficient.
And Frank and AFT have done a good job for years with professional development, and we've been offering a lot of it, and it's tonight in our office we're doing some professional, it's very well attended, but it's, again, we ask, what do you need? And then when they tell us, then we can meet those needs. And that's the way to do it. Again, what the teachers need to be successful.
Absolutely. And I think having those meetings is critical, because they need to tell you exactly what no one knows better, right, than those in the classroom right there.
And in the example of the mental health with those meetings from a couple of years ago, again, it turned to mental health right away, because that's what every teacher, every support professional, the custodians we had in the meetings, everyone said that was the key issue that needed to be addressed.
Now, are there events or things to look out for that people can get involved with? I'm sure your members are well aware of the meetings that happen and that they can take part in, but any more supports that people can be involved with?
Well, we urge our locals and our members through their locals to get involved in the budget processes in their local cities and towns, to make sure that we have enough funds, we fund our schools appropriately.
Right.
The way the funding generally works, there's state funding and then there's local funding, and oftentimes the schools in the local districts are at the end of the food chain, so to speak, because they're not prioritized, because the state does, generally gives additional money, but that's still not enough in many of our districts. So we need to get members engaged to become activists to make sure that we fund our schools adequately.
Yeah, and you mentioned having Stephanie on last week. She does a terrific job of getting out what we're doing and our webpage and everything to keep members informed. And again, we're looking forward to our 175th and doing some activities to get our members involved even more.
Are you celebrating that on is it a specific day this year, or is that this whole year?
We're going to kick it off probably in the next couple of months, but it'll be kind of a year-long thing, highlight.
As it should be.
And ending with, we certainly highlight Education Week and National Teacher Day, and also National ESP Day in November. So those will be some of the highlights.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to getting more information on that, and I'm definitely going to follow up on some of this legislation, and it'd be great to have you both in throughout the legislative year so we can hear more about how it's going and how people can get involved. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, for those of you tuning in, you're watching Labor Vision. For anyone who's just tuning in and missed any of this episode, you can check out the entire episode on our new website. It's www.laborvisionri.org, or you can check out our YouTube channel. It's Labor Vision TV 1. Thank you so much for joining. We hope you have a great night. Welcome to Labor Vision, a production of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I am your host, Erica Hammond, and joined with me today from AFSCME, Rhode Island Council 94, is Jim Cenerini. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
All right, I know we have a lot on the schedule, so let's dive right into what your organization is working on this year's legislative session. So we'll start with the budget.
Sure.
Would you like to explain some of Council 94's position on the administration's budget recommendations?
Sure. So just to back up and introduce myself, because it's been, I think, close to 10 years since I've been on the show. My name's Jim Cenerini. I work for Rhode Island Council 94, the American Federation of State County Municipal Employees, and I work as the Legislative Affairs and Political Action Coordinator, and also as a senior staff representative. So originally when I started working with Council 94 in 2002, I was primarily focused on legislation, research, communications work. Now my role has evolved where it's a little bit different, where I still do the lobbying and political work, but I also represent a large number of active employees in contract negotiations and contract enforcement. So today we're here to talk about one of my first loves, which is government and the legislative process. So you too, if you desire to go to school for political science, there may be employment options in your future.
All right.
Contrary to what a lot of people will tell you. So the first thing I would tell you is one of the largest priorities for our union in every legislative session is to analyze the state budget. We represent over 8,000 active employees, roughly divided in 50%. 4,000 of those work for state agencies in just about every single state agency for the state of Rhode Island. And then we represent another 4,000 members who work in just about every municipality and city and town in the state of Rhode Island. And so we also additionally represent private sector workers who are somewhat reliant on the state budget, because many of those private sector workers work as bus drivers or in the school lunch program. So for examples of the types of jobs that our members do, we represent everything from the scale of janitors, custodians, housekeepers, cooks, helpers, all the way through to wetland biologists, clinical lab scientists, and it ranges really over the map. Just about any kind of job, eligibility technicians, any kind of job that you can imagine being out there, it falls within the range of Council 94 to represent in our contracts. As such, the state budget is the most important document that generally goes through the legislature every year, because while it is the state budget, there's also other types of funding that cities, towns, other private entities are reliant upon. So when the state budget comes out, that bill, it's in a form of a bill, is generally 300 to 400 pages. And we have to go through that bill line by line to see what impacts may be. But anyone who tells you that they really understand the state budget just by reading the legislation, I would be careful about believing them, because any lobbyist worth their weight in salt is going to tell you that after the state budget comes out, we dive first into the series of budget books that come out from the administration, being the executive summary, and all of the different agencies have basically are compiled into a series of books. So we have to then examine the executive summary to figure out what is actually in the budget and what the governor's intentions are. But even from those documents, it's not always entirely clear about what the impacts or the ramifications are on critical state services, whether it's the food stamp program or whether it's SNAP benefits, or whether it's your cash assistance benefits, or whether it's environmental protection done by DEM. It's not always clear just from those documents what the implications of the changes are. So then all lobbyists generally wait to dive in and review all of the fiscal analysis done by the House Finance Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. And then by going through all of those sources, and it can easily be over 1,000 to 2,000 pages worth of information, we then piece together what the potential impacts are of the budget.
Okay.
So to give you an example, last year concretely, there was an efficiency commission that was launched in the administration, and we actually identified 2 really bad ideas that Council 94 had been successful in stopping. And the first was the privatization of the laboratory at the Eleanor Slater Hospital. This lab originally had been threatened with being outsourced at least 2 or 3 years ago. And that lab provides medical testing for some of the most vulnerable clientele at the state hospital, whether they are on ventilator beds, whether they have acute psychiatric diagnoses, or really long-term acute care needs that can't be handled in private nursing homes. So originally it started as a fight between agencies, but the administration had tried to outsource that lab. Ironically enough, the year that that had been introduced, they had received 100% flawless accreditation score from the Joint Commission, which certifies the lab in the hospital. The members got really active, and we were successful in beating that back. Last year in the Efficiency Commission, that proposal came back again, and we were very grateful that the members mobilized, and the House and Senate Finance Committees, after a lot of testimony, agreed with us, actually rejected the efforts to outsource that work yet again. And actually, for many years, that lab had provided free medical testing for DOC. They went a step further and ordered the Department of Corrections to bring lab work that they had outsourced back to the lab that has always done that at Eleanor Slater Hospital for free. So now we're in the process of trying to make sure, number one, that those lab services, which are done at an excellent level of quality of care and great value to the taxpayer, are still done at Eleanor Slater Hospital, and now we're watching to make sure that that work is insourced.
Okay.
The second example would be last year they had proposed to shift all of the audio testing that's done in all of the elementary schools throughout the state by the School for the Deaf, which are done by our audio test technicians at the Department of Education and the School for the Deaf. They wanted to shift the cost of that to the local school districts. It made no sense.
Right.
It's an extremely effective program. Does over 50,000 tests a year. Again, we spent a lot of time working with our members, mobilizing them, and going to House and Senate Finance Committee meetings, and we were very grateful that the General Assembly kept that program intact. Actually, it was a very good campaign because all of the school districts and the unions were all on the same side. And it was another example of identifying a bad budget choice and stopping it before it was implemented.
Okay. And are there any other budget items that you'll be looking at for this year? Or?
We have several different threats. We're very concerned about the integrity of the training school. The training school is somewhere where generally individuals who commit very violent crimes, even though they are juveniles, are sent for rehabilitation. The state has made some, we believe, regrettable programming choices where they're now letting youth out with less than 50% time served. The population and residency of the training school has gone lower and lower. We have a concern about the state trying to downsize it again, and we're watching for that very critically.
And moving on to some more legislative stuff, the reinstatement of licensure for clinical laboratory science practitioners. Can you talk a little bit about this work, what a clinical laboratory science practitioner is?
Sure. For the clinical lab scientists are those people that at hospitals, whenever you go in, will run all of your blood lab results. It's very important work. And many years ago, actually, there had been a misdiagnosis because lab work wasn't done properly in the Newport area. So from that, they created a very detailed licensure requirement. The administration proposed, supposedly to try to make the state more business friendly, they eliminated all of the licensure. So I have to give credit to the United Nurses and Allied Professionals, Senator Ewer and Representative Carson. They assembled a great coalition last year. We all worked together very hard, and we actually, for the first time ever, the original action to eliminate licensure was in 2015. All of us had opposed it, but we all worked hard last year, and that legislation finally advanced, at least through one chamber in the Senate, and we're going to be going back again to do that this year.
So that's the impact this has on not only your members, but also all of Rhode Islanders it's very obvious.
It's a great example of unions working. We don't have a tremendous amount of members, like it's not a couple of hundred, but it is something that is certainly good public policy that benefits the public health of not just union members, but all the citizens of Rhode Island. So we're going to keep driving that forward.
All right. And lastly, do you want to go into a little bit of the legislative work you are doing around public safety? Sure.
On public safety, one of the great problems with the 2011 pension reform, or pension changes as we call them, was that Council 94 represents a couple of hundred public safety professionals, including Capitol Police, deputy sheriffs, armed university police, campus police, and one thing that, and environmental police, and one thing that occurred is that during the pension changes, better eligibility ages were granted to municipal police and municipal firefighters because of the dangerous nature of their job, and that it's not a wise idea for them to work to age 67 in those jobs. Unfortunately, despite our many arguments about the way that the pension changes were done, one thing that certainly was ignored was that we felt that our public safety members should receive the same treatment as municipal police and fire. We have no problems that we're not saying that anything should be taken away from municipal police and fire, but what we have most recently argued is that our public safety officers, many who are fully trained, fully sworn, full arrest powers, should have the same type of pension eligibility requirements. It just defies logic that our members who do have high injury rates, do have very dangerous jobs, do have full arrest powers. Sometimes for our airport crash rescue, they actually have higher physical agility requirements on an annual basis with testing, now are required to work to age 67, and perform these similarly demanding, physically demanding jobs. It makes no sense. We plan to approach this issue again. At the bare minimum, we hope we can get an actuarial study to get an idea of the cost of the changes.
Okay. And before we wrap up, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, there's one issue that I know that's come to the attention of President Mike Downey, is that we have received a lot of complaints about some of the secrecy that still revolves around investments made by venture capital funds. And so it's an extremely risky vehicle that has been used. We have urged consistently that there needs to be more transparency. There's been recent news media coverage by Ted Siddell concerning certain investments that have these strange provisions that allow the venture fund to choose to hold on to potentially state pension investment money for as long as they want, and do it in a secret manner where the votes aren't secret, the voting members are secret, the fee structure is secret. We find that to be highly troublesome. So we have not developed a specific legislative proposal as of yet, but we're going to be dedicating some time and energy to that issue.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Your explanation on each of these legislative pieces is super helpful to myself, and I'm sure plenty of our viewers as well.
Thank you so much.
So I'm looking forward to tracking this legislation and seeing how it goes this year.
Appreciate it. Looking
you.
forward to seeing you at State House.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jim. For those of you tuning in, you're watching Labor Vision, make sure to check out our new website. It's www.laborvisionri.org. And we hope to see you back here next week. Thanks for watching. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.